The decision by the Trump administration brings with it not only political and security concerns, but many legal questions as well. Mainly, does the embassy move mean the United States now recognizes Jerusalem as being under Israeli sovereignty? To discuss this further, we're joined by attorney and media analyst at honestreporting.com, Daniel Pomerantz, and still in studio with Mike Wagenheim, our diplomatic correspondent. Daniel, good to see you. Can you give us some background on the legal status of the city, basically from 1948, the creation of the State of Israel, until today, through the Six-Day War, of course?
Well, sure. Really, it starts in 1947 with the passage of UN Resolution 181, which said that there would be a Jewish state, an Arab state. This was before the term Palestinian came into common usage, and that there would also be a corpus separatum, an international territory, and that would be Jerusalem. Now, a UN General Assembly resolution isn't law, it's a suggestion. The Jews forming a state took the suggestion, the Arabs rejected it. It resulted in fighting throughout 1967, and through the following years there was some changing of borders, and now we've gotten to a point where the status legally, there's a lot of scholarship on this. And I could talk for 2 hours. I won't.
I'll bet.
But I'll tell you something I tell all my clients, and when I was in private practice, and I tell all my students now, which is that there's a difference between law and reality. And whatever the law says, and there's a lot of scholarship on both sides, you can't have real stability until on the ground the parties involved, not just in Israel, but in any territory dispute, that the parties involved come to an agreement.
All right, Mike, we'll get you to weigh in here, and of course, add to this if you'd like, Dan. What does this embassy move achieve then, if we're looking at the legal thing, other than making a symbolic expression?
See, this is where all these little minutiae come into play. You take, for example, the passport issue. If an American gets a passport, if an American was born in Jerusalem and gets a passport, it simply says Jerusalem. It doesn't say Israel. There are all these little details to work out, but you look at the embassy that's being opened and you see the banners that were draped, and it says Jerusalem, Israel. When you look at the invitation for the embassy opening from the United States, it says Jerusalem, Israel. So that's the big question now. Is America going to, I'm not just talking about in theory, I'm talking about in practice. Will it start to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital? And we talk about law and reality. The reality will come when more and more countries recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. That's when reality is going to take over what may be viewed as the law.
Yeah, that's what I want to talk about the law with you, because when one state locates its embassy to another state in a particular territory, that generally indicates that the former state recognizes that territory as being within that latter state's sovereignty. So does this mean, Daniel, that the U.S. believes Jerusalem is under Israeli sovereignty?
You know, it's an interesting point. A lot of people don't know this. There's actually nothing in international law that requires your capital to be inside your country. And there are a number of capitals in the world that are in situations that are ambiguous or even have occupation-type situations. Cyprus is one example. During the Cold War, the status of Berlin as the de jure capital of West Germany. A number of examples like this. So the question is, what is the reality in this situation? Now, this does open an interesting possibility. Whatever the final status of Jerusalem is, it will require creative solutions. If a capital doesn't have to be inside of a country, it's possible that a Palestinian capital doesn't necessarily have to be inside of a Palestinian state. I don't know that the parties would agree to it, but it's one more creative solution, and I like it when the law opens more solutions rather than closing them off.
Right.
But the answer is that what the United States is doing with the embassy does not necessarily reflect a position on the status of sovereign borders until the president actually orders the State Department to take action in that direction.
Is it, though, that ultimately the United Nations that determines the final status of Jerusalem?
Well, actually, there's only one way in which a United Nations resolution can be international law, and that is when it's passed under Chapter 6, which is the Security Council, and not even all Security Council acts, but only very specific ones, like the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait was a Chapter 6 resolution. The General Assembly passes what are called Chapter 4 resolutions, which are really international suggestions. They only become law if all the parties involved agree to them, and then the treaty becomes international law.
I'll ask you, Mike, because I'm wondering why the State Department is saying, you know, the borders and the final status are not set in stone yet. Is this to circumvent all the legal issues, all the legal, you know, stuff?
It's part of that, but part of it is that there's still this dream, this vision within the Trump administration that we're somehow going to settle this and get a peace deal done. And this is their way of leaving this crack in the door open to try to get that done. That crack, I think, in my opinion, is going to close very quickly, and you'll start hearing less from the U.S. about final status issues, I think, in the very short-term future.
I actually somewhat tend to disagree. I think that's based on the idea that Israel would only take action if it absolutely had to because of outside pressure. But if you take the position that Israelis really want to accomplish something if they feel safe doing it, then anything is really possible, regardless of what the rest of the world says or doesn't say.
Well, it's all possibilities at this point.